Welcome, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We just, that is the way of the world. Sometimes we have to just be a little bit patient. So thank you very much. I just wanted to, first of all, say it'd be really wonderful if you would like to join in the chat box, just to say which country you're calling in from. It'd be really nice to see where everyone is positioned today. I'm going to kick off straight away. So, welcome to Regional Arts New South Wales' fourth panel session of the Country Air. The Country Air is presented by Regional Arts New South Wales as a monthly online discussion. It's a panel which looks at the key issues facing arts and culture in regional Australia. The Country Air aims to directly engage with people living and working in regional New South Wales and beyond across Australia. And today, Wednesday, the 16th of November, 2022, and it's 6 p.m. in New South Wales, 5 p.m. in Queensland. So my name is Dr. Sally Blackwood, and I'm your host for this evening's fourth Country Air panel session, in which we're going to discuss living and working on country. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to a fabulous panel. I'm calling in from Gamilaroi country, and to audio describe myself, I'm sitting in a white room with a door behind me, and I'm dressed in navy. I have pale skin and blondish hair all pinned up. Tiny bit of housekeeping. Regional Arts New South Wales are recording this Country Air series. You would have seen that flash up on your screen, I hope. And that's so that audiences can access this discussion online after the event. So please, if you don't wish to be filmed, obviously feel free to turn your videos off, which a number of people have done. We encourage participation. Thank you for everyone who's already calling in. That's awesome. From Wiradjuri country, more from Gamilaroi. That's awesome. If you would like to add any questions or comments, please use the chat box. Most of all, you've found it at the bottom, the icon's at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to jump on in and say hi and ask questions at any time. And Dr. Tracy will take care of your questions and feed it to the panel in due course. Today, so managing the chat box is Regional Arts New South Wales CEO, Dr. Tracy Carman. Wave, thank you. And we've got a beautiful new addition to the family. So Regional Arts Admin and Projects Officer, Dr. Julia Giardi. Thank you, Julia. Beautiful. Today's session will run for an hour and we'll conclude at 7, maybe 5 past. If we started 5 minutes late, let's see how we go. In a moment, I'll introduce you to the esteemed panel members and then kick off the discussion with some prepared questions. Before I do introduce you to our speakers, I would like to ask one of our panelists and Regional Arts New South Wales Board Director, Tasha James, to please conduct an acknowledgement of country.
Thank you, Sally. I'm Tasha James. I come from a long matriarchal line of Wiradjuri women. I was born and raised in Wiradjuri country in Dubbo, Central West New South Wales. And today I acknowledge that I speak to you from the beautiful lands of the Bidjigal people here in southern Sydney. I'm not that far from Kiama, which is commonly known as Botany Bay, where the Bidjigal people were the first who encountered the first fleet. I am on the lands of the great Bidjigal warrior and resistant fighter Pamaway, and I pay my respects to country and the custodians of these lands and waterways that I have the privilege to live on, like many. I thank the Bidjigal people and their ancestors for allowing me safety whilst a visitor on this country. I acknowledge and pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us online, and also pay my respects to those First Nations sisters who share the panel with me also. No matter what country you're on right now, take a moment to sit with country, listen, and know that you are held safely in the hands of place, its custodians and spirit. Thank you.
Thanks, Tasha. Thank you so much. That's really powerful. Thank you. So today's discussion, living and working on country. Let's first meet our panelists. So Tasha James, who you've just heard from, Manager of ABC Archives, Indigenous Collections and Community Access, and obviously the Regional Arts New South Wales Board Director. Tasha, being a Wiradjuri woman, grew up in Dubbo on the Central West New South Wales, homelands across the region of the Lower Bogan River and Wiradjuri country. Before Tasha was at the ABC, she was a manager of Indigenous Connections at the National Film and Sound Archives of Australia. Throughout Tasha's career, she has held a number of roles in major cultural institutions, such as the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, IATSIS, and the Australian Museum, where she worked closely with Indigenous communities by facilitating access to collections to reconnect them with cultural heritage. Tasha has also worked in Indigenous public programs and outreach focused on sharing and educating others about our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. Welcome, Tasha. Thank you. Our next speaker and wonderful panelist is Patricia Adjei. She's the head of First Nations Arts and Culture at the Australian Council for the Arts. Patricia is a Waiyathi Mayabul Islander and Ghanaian woman from Sydney. She's a Bachelor of Arts Law from New South Wales. Before her leadership position at the Australia Council, Patricia worked at the copyright agency VisiCopy as in the Indigenous Engagement Manager. In 2018, she was given a Churchill Fellowship to investigate the practical applications of law in the US and Panama that protect Indigenous cultural rights. Patricia served on the City of Sydney Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Panel and has been a board member for the Contemporary Pacific Arts Festival and Muglin Performing Arts Board. Patricia is also a published author and has written several articles and chapters on Indigenous cultural intellectual property rights. Welcome, Patricia. Our third panellist is Alicia Longsdale. Alicia is an Aboriginal Arts Development Officer at Arts Out West. Alicia's a Wiradjuri woman. She's from Mudgee, New South Wales. She's a visual artist, a curator and arts worker based in regional New South Wales. She's an alumnus of the National Gallery of Australia's NGA Wesfarmers Indigenous Leadership Program. Alicia is a chairperson of the Mudgee Local Aboriginal Land Council, which focuses on protecting, maintaining and sharing country, cultural heritage and cultural practices. As a multidisciplinary artist, Alicia creates works which respond to place, time and cultural values and traditions and contemporary issues of First Nations people today. Welcome, Alicia, and welcome everyone on the panel. It's a really esteemed First Nations panel, so thank you for being here. Our discussion, living and working on country, is at the core of what we do and who we are. How do First Nations protocols guide and shape creative practice and help us to ensure that we work collaboratively and respectfully on country? The discussion tonight comes at a time when the federal government is looking to enshrine the Uluru Statement from the Heart and Makarrata as a way of walking together. The arts sector is also working towards a national cultural policy with First Nations ways of being, knowing and doing. And it's also a time when the Australia Council has placed First Nations arts as a central tenet of their organisational strategy. We're also at a time where Australia Council has just presented Purumpa, a national gathering and celebration of First Nations arts and culture held over 5 days in Adelaide. So it's a really big, essential time for First Nations arts and culture at the moment. I'm going to open a discussion with Alicia. Alicia, as a First Nations woman, what does it mean to live and work on country?
So I think for me, it's really central to me as a practitioner. It's really at the core of everything that I do. In terms of my own arts practice, like it informs a lot of the work that I create. You know, country really is that connector to place and to kin, to the dreaming. So it really grounds me and informs all of the work that I do as a creative. In terms of my work as an arts officer, I'm lucky that I get to work on my own country, but also across Wiradjuri country. And for me, it's about supporting other artists and practitioners to really, I guess, express themselves and their country through their work. So for me, it's really central to what I do, and I really draw strength from that.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Tasha or Trish, did you want to add anything from your perspectives about what it is to live perhaps away from country and go to country?
Yeah, I can jump in here, Trish. I guess for me, I haven't lived on country for, possibly close to 20 years. And this is something that I have struggled with, just in terms of what Alicia was talking about as a Wiradjuri woman living off country. I mean, when we use the word country, we use it in a special way, and it's I guess, country's inherent. We were born into it. So it is how we identify ourselves, and it's our, I guess, family connections, our community, our kinship ties. It's where we come from. So I do find that at times you do feel a little bit disconnected when you are working off country, in particular the roles that I've worked in, in my professional life through working in major cities. It's really important to go back home to ground yourself. But I also have had the privilege of working across Australia, across many different nations, and seeing firsthand the importance of, I guess, being on country and working with your community.
Yeah, thank you. That disconnection must be as important to note as connection, to really understand place and kinship. Thank you. Trish, did you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I think also, it's great to have that connection. It provides that really sort of strong cultural connection to country, being able to practice language. I think some communities are really fortunate to have that. But if you live off country like myself and Tasha, I've never been to Wathathi country in East Cape York. I've been to the Torres Strait where my family come from, but I was born on the mainland and have spent most of my life on Bidjigal and Gadigal country. And so I think you almost become at home as well on your adopted country. And I live by the water, so I'm a saltwater woman. I need to be near the ocean, and that I find that really grounds me as well. But I think also, as Tasha was saying, being really fortunate to visit other countries across this beautiful land and learning the different languages, the different cultures, the different stories that connect different communities across country. I feel very privileged to sort of have that really great experience of going to a lot of places where, many Australians haven't sort of been to. And so I also find that, when I go to these new places and learn about culture and language, it's really important to sit with the elders and hear their stories and be really sort of, we always say sort of tread lightly and be really respectful of their country as well.
Thanks, Trish. That's really beautiful. Tasha, I was going to ask you, what are some common misconceptions, perhaps, about living and working on country? Tash, I can't hear you. Can we start again? Thank you, my love.
Oh, it wouldn't unmute. Sorry about that, everyone. I guess through the work that I do, archives and broadcast, I find that there are some really big misconceptions about community and the approach to sort of like I guess when you're engaging community or you're, wanting to consult community in a way to assist with, say, community consultation around the project that you're working on to engage that community. I feel there's a great misconception that it's a one-stop shop. And I feel that there is misconceptions around the knowledge holders and cultural authority as well. So I know that through the work that I do, pretty much in communities, there may be a cultural authority seeing that Aboriginal Land Council may be the cultural authority on that community, but that may not necessarily be the case where, outside of Aboriginal Lands Councils, they also have the other you know, senior knowledge holders, elders, other community organisations that hold that knowledge as well. So I feel that's probably what I've seen is a misconception when people are going to approach communities to engage on, you know, projects and work that they're working on.
Yeah, thank you. Alicia, did you want to add to that? Was there anything that you'd like to?
Yeah, I'd agree with that 100%. I think there's also there's the misconception that one size fits all, where Mudgee is very different to Dubbo, which is very different to Wellington, like we're all different. So each community, I think you've got to treat that on a case-by-case basis, and it might be within that one community that you've got to do consultation or had that same conversation 5 different times with 5 different groups, but sometimes it's just what you've got to do to make sure that you talk to everyone. So yeah, it's not just as easy as ticking the box. And I think too that consultation's got to be more than just coming and saying we're going to do this project and we've let you know that's consultation, that's it. So I think that's the other thing too, that's not real consultation with people. So
Absolutely. I was going to ask a bit later, but I might jump in now. Consultation or collaboration, they're very different years, and consultation is bandied around a lot. What are your thoughts on that? Alicia, do you want to say a little bit more?
I think we're probably the most consulted people in Australia. If we had $1 for every time we've had a consultation on something, we'd be able to fund everything. So yeah, it's got to be more than just ticking the box. And you know, we want more these days than people just coming and saying we're going to do this project, what do you think? You know, we want to be involved in projects from the ground up. We want to be running projects. We want to be supported to be able to do that. But we want to be able to collaborate with people as equal partners. You know, it's got to be more than just ticking the box to say, yes, we've spoken to the Aboriginal community and that's it. It's not good enough these days.
Absolutely. Trish, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think in terms of consultation, it can be really strong, like Alicia says, if it's done in a respectful and appropriate way. And so where the advice is really listened to, respected, and really taken on board, but from the beginning of an idea. So we always say with the protocols that first you have to sit down with mob and build those relationships. If you don't have those relationships already established, you have to take the time to build those relationships first before you even start talking about consultation. And then once you have, if you're lucky enough to have strong relationships sort of built over time, then start talking about the idea of a project. And then that sort of consultation process will evolve over time, but it's really from the beginning of the project right to the end of the project, and making sure that you bring either, you know, if you're working with elders or the cultural custodians, whoever you're working with, you bring them along with you from the beginning right to the end of the project, so they feel comfortable. They're, you know, really well informed about what is happening, what's happening with their, you know, cultural knowledge, or, you know, sort of whatever content you're sort of collaborating with them on. And then making sure that they're also paid for their time and expertise and cultural knowledge as well. And, you know, you might find that when you're consulting, people might say no. And that's also okay. That's their right to say no. So you might have to sort of adjust what you're doing, or, you know, sort of think about, okay, maybe I shouldn't be doing this type of project, because there's a reason why people might be saying no as well. So yeah, it's a long process. As Alicia says, it's not like a ticker box quick, okay, we've talked to them, yeah, it's fine, it's great. It's more than that. It's sort of being, you know, on country as well with elders and cultural custodians, building up those relationships, taking the time to bring them along with you on that project.
Yeah, thank you so much. Trisha, what do we mean when we say First Nations protocols? What are they, and why do they exist?
So the protocols are really there for two reasons. The first is because in Australia at the moment we don't have sort of existing laws that fully protect Indigenous culture and art and knowledge. And so the protocols really sort of came out of communities really being upset that people were using their culture and their knowledge without their permission, without their consent. And so because we don't have those laws in place, the protocols were sort of set up to almost fill that gap that we're seeing in existing legal protection in this country. And so the first, so back in 2002, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Arts Board at the Australia Council kept hearing these issues from community, like people stealing my songs, they're stealing my artworks, they're stealing my designs, they're stealing our stories. We're not getting any recognition. They're not asking us, they're not paying for that, for the use of those stories, or they're misinterpreting our stories and publishing the wrong way. So the protocols were set up in 2002 by the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Arts Board to address those gaps. And so the protocols are almost like best practice guidelines to give people an idea, 10-step process on how you properly engage and collaborate and co-design with First Nations communities and artists for the use of their cultural material or language or art or music. And so we've had sort of 3 editions of these protocols. So I worked with Dr. Terry Jenke, who's a leading IP Indigenous lawyer working in this space. And back in 2018, she revised the 2007 edition of the protocols, which go through that 10-step process that she uses, that she's developed over the decades, the True Tracks principles. And so these principles talk to elements around respect, proper consultation, consent, attribution, how you deal with secret and sacred information, cultural information that might not be able to be shared outside of a community, for example. Also benefit sharing or making sure that communities are paid for their time and expertise and cultural knowledge. And so the protocols are there to provide that best practice ethical guidance for people. And then the protocols have 14 case studies. So all the art forms that the Australia Council funds. So we fund everything except film and television. That's Screen Australia. They fund screen and television. And so there's 14 case studies across all the art forms. There's a couple of Wiradjuri case studies in there. So we've got in the visual arts example, there's Jonathan Jones's work, and he developed a collaborative work back in 2017, 2018 for the Asia Pacific Triennial. So he talks through the 10 principles of the protocols in his case study. And there's also Tara June Winch's book, The Yield. And she also talks through how she developed that work with Wiradjuri elders and using Wiradjuri language within that story as well. But the case studies really bring to life how you practically apply those 10 principles in the protocols.
Thank you so much. That's a huge amount of information and knowledge. That's really fantastic. And I think we'll go on in a minute to talk a bit more about that practical application, because I think that's how do we actually go from having these protocols to being on country and using them. I'm just going to check in with Dr. Tracy over here and see if there's anything in the chat room that we need to ask the panelists.
No, there is nothing in the chat room, which I always think is a very good sign, because nobody needs to be asking questions or commenting, because they're all clearly listening to what's being said.
Excellent. All right. So I'm just going to jump back to Alicia, because I'm really interested in both looking at the protocols, but also how does this work as an artist? So I'm thinking about you, Alicia, your connection to country. How does it guide and shape your work, both as an artist and an Aboriginal Arts Development Officer? You touched on this before, but I was wondering the practicalities of using protocol and how that might guide and shape your work.
So I guess as an artist, even though I'm working on my own country, I still follow those practices You know, it's sort of, I guess, just how I've been brought up rather than protocols out of a book. But if I have an idea of an issue that I want to talk about through an artwork, then for me, it's still talking to communities, talking to elders, explaining what I want to do. It might be talking about materials I want to use. So it's really going back to knowledge holders, to custodians, and making sure that I'm still doing the right thing, even though it's on my own country. So I guess that's for me as with my own work, and making sure that they're happy with what I'm doing, the story that I'm telling. As a curator, so I've just curated a show here at the Mudgee Arts Precinct, and it was the same thing. It was ensuring that the community here was happy with the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal artists, what their works were, what the story was that they were telling through those works. So it was, again, helping them to follow those protocols. And then I guess in terms of my work as an arts worker across different communities, it's ensuring that people are connecting with those communities and following their protocols, not what I might say as an Aboriginal person from my knowledge of my community, but what do they want and what do they expect people to do, and what protocols do they have in their community in Condobolin, for instance. So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, I guess it's still, as an Aboriginal person, I still follow that, and I still try to support other people to follow that in whatever community or art form that they're working in. Yeah, just to ensure that happens, because that's what I would expect in my community. So yeah,
beautiful. So leading by example.
Yeah.
And you're mentioning, you know, one size doesn't fit all, and saying that those the protocol would be different on different country, and I think that must be incredibly important. Would you say that it's as Trish was discussing, that it's about relationships first, that it's about sitting down with elders before a project is even coming to fruition?
Yes, 100%. There's nothing worse than when someone comes and presents a fully formed project and it's kind of like you tack on them on the end. Nothing worse. Where if you come and speak to people, you know, 9 times out of 10 it can enhance your original idea, and people then feel more supportive and more invested in your project that you're doing if you involve people from the start. So that's always the best way to get the most out of a project, and to ensure that it has that ongoing support. And as Trish said, it's an ongoing process. It's not just at the start either. It's something that you keep continually coming back to.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Trish, if people want to use these protocols, where do they access them? How do we know? How do we read up about what we need to know? How do we, continue to have those discussions?
Yeah, so the protocols, I've got a copy here. It's a 200-page.
Right, we'll all come to you. That's fabulous.
So you come over to my house now. So they are actually available on the Australia Council website. I'll put the link in the chat.
Right.
So under the First Nations tab in the Australia Council website, they are available there as a PDF for download. And we will have more information early next year, I think, in terms of webinars. There's going to be some graphic illustrations of some of the case studies, so people can really sort of engage with the protocols as well. Because yeah, it's quite a big document, but I always say the case studies are the best part. So have a look at the case studies, and there's a really good checklist at the back on page 168, which is sort of like a step-by-step process on how you implement the principles of the protocols.
Is there, if people are daunted by such a big policy document, are there certain elements that might apply to different parts of the arts, or is there somehow to kind of what's the accessibility of that? If I were wanting to go onto country and say create a performance piece, what would I do? What do I need to do?
So there are case studies around performance. So there is an example around what WA Ballet did with Larrakia choreographer Gary Lang, and sort of how they worked through the protocols. But as Alicia said, every community is a bit different. So we've tried to sort of reflect in the case studies a national perspective. But I think in terms of if you're sort of starting in a community, you start building up those relationships, have a chat with them to see, you know, what the protocols are in their sort of region, and what they really want to see in terms of you know, respecting their ways, their stories. And that's really, I guess, the best way to sort of implement. The protocols are there to be sort of a best practice guide, but every community is totally different. So I think that sort of relationship building and using the protocols, that checklist at the back, can also help work through, you know, what you might see in terms of ethical practice and good collaboration as well. I should also mention Create New South Wales have also developed really strong protocols as well. So I'd also recommend that people have a look at them. They're on the Create New South Wales website as well.
That's great. I might get Tracy to get that up on the Regional Arts New South Wales website as well when we have the recording of this up. Tasha.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to anyone that filmmakers out there have just put in the chat Screen Australia's pathways and protocols for working with Indigenous people and culture and concepts as well, which is exactly what Trish was talking about, but just in the screen.
That's fantastic. And you've perfectly segued, because I wanted to jump in and ask you that about on screen and in the archival process, how and why a First Nations protocol is important.
Oh, it's actually everything what Trish and Alicia were touching on as well. But I guess in regards to archives, libraries, I mean, collecting institutions, where what Trish was speaking about, you know, moral rights and ethical rights, ways in what, you know, how do we recognise those rights of Indigenous peoples if only copyright is actually recognised legally. So what we do in the cultural institutions is that we develop our own set of, using Terry Jenkins' work and those 10 principles. We then develop our own protocols and make them a policy within our organisations that, in regards to how we manage collection material, Indigenous collection material and content, how we share it, how we represent it. It is all within these protocols, and how I guess we're using First Nations cultural and intellectual property. And just going back to what we were talking about, the consultation and it just not being a ticker box, it is so important when you are engaging with First Nations communities and people that you have to, I suppose, you have to really consider that it's not a short task. It's not like, you have to really accept that it could be a long process. It's not, it's, you know, time is, you know, it's not, there's so many factors that come into it that may blow out your timeline and your deadlines. And that's why it is so important to engage those Indigenous knowledge holders at first, and, you know, make it an authentic collaboration and bring them along the whole time. I know with several projects that I've worked over on the years, where engaging with community knowledge holders to inform the collections that we are custodians over in cultural organisations. It's so important to engage those knowledge holders who inform what protocols we should have in place in regards to what I was talking about with developing those protocols to take care of the collection in a culturally appropriate way as well, and provide culturally safe environments to take care and access these type of cultural materials.
Can you explain what a culturally safe environment is, just in case people don't understand?
Yeah, so culture, just to give you an example from working in archives with, I guess, a collection of material that is made up, you know, historical collections, dating back to the, early 1920s to now. And over that time, there may be sensitivities in those collections. Maybe there's offensive language, terminology, how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been represented in the past. And these can, I guess, put Indigenous staff at risk and community at risk by accessing these materials. So to, I suppose, provide a culturally safe environment for Indigenous staff and Indigenous communities engaging with this type of content, we have a set of protocols in place in how we actually do that. From when, if it's sacred materials, there's protocols around how we handle that, how we store that, who can access that. We also have protocols around gender-specific material as well, restricted content. There are so many different protocols because, as you can imagine, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia is very diverse. We come from many nations. We have many languages, many customs, different laws, ceremony, and it's our obligation who work in these collecting institutions like galleries, libraries, museums, archives that hold this content, that we do have these protocols in place to create these culturally safe environments, and also that we don't, put risk to the cultural integrity of the content or the collection material as well. So it's about creating a safe environment, Sally, just in terms of how we manage and access that cultural knowledge.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. It really makes a lot of sense, and history to be contextualized as well. And reminding us, thank you for reminding us of the diversity of country as well, that there is such a diversity across countries, and how important that is. I was wondering if either you, Tash, or maybe Alicia could talk about a project where protocols have been put in place and worked really well, and maybe the kind of timeline of that, and the expectations, how that has come to fruition.
I've got one, Alicia, if you want me to take it, or you can, if you've got one. You want me to go? Yeah. Recently, when I was working at the National Film and Sound Archive, I was working on a project which was the Central Australian Aboriginal Men's Collection Project, which, if I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with TGH Strelo, an anthropologist from Central Australia, who, his work covered decades of working in Central Australia, in particular with Aranda men, and I'm talking from the 1930s to the 1970s. And there's actually a research centre in Alice Springs called the the Strelo Research Centre. So the project that I was managing was, I inherited it. It started like a year. There was, initial consultations with Strelo Research Centre staff and the local Aranda knowledge holders. And when I inherited it, I had to sort of go back over and re-establish the relationships with the Aranda in Central Australia. But also there were protocols around that this was men's material. So this was very unique audio-visual, so film and sound material that the National Film and Sound Archive had in their care. And the project was to digitise that material and return that material to the Aranda for cultural maintenance, and to, I guess, just to sort of have access on country rather than the Aranda having to go to Canberra to get access to their cultural material. So throughout that process with the digitisation of this material, and me being a woman, a Wiradjuri woman, the protocols around it were that Aboriginal, well, not just Aboriginal, but no women were to interact with this material at all. So therefore, it was very important for me to build and reestablish that relationship with these senior men, that they would give me permission for me to, I always say, as the project manager, I guess I directed traffic, so to speak, but it was those senior men, those elders who guided and led me through this whole process of this project, which was a different way that a cultural institution like the NFSA had worked before. So it was very, very important that I gained the trust of these men as well, and that, they were assured that we wouldn't break any cultural law in terms of people, putting the collection at risk whilst they were doing the digitisation process. So we had to develop in consultation, and I'm talking about proper consultation, where, these senior men were across everything that we were doing, and they were approving every part of the process. So it were things like, getting the analog tapes from the storage. It had to be a man. It had to be a man who then escorts it to the main building to then give it to somebody else. It had to be covered. We had to sign off on every part of that process so that we can, I guess, ensure that we were doing proper way, like we were doing the right thing by the elders and their ancestors. This process went on. I think we're just coming up. Well, I think the whole digitisation project is done. So the digitisation copies have been returned. They were escorted to Alice Springs by a mail escort. Oh, that didn't sound right. But they were escorted by a mail, and to the point where they had to have carry on. So it was in there. And, and these are, this is a really amazing example in how you do proper way of, I guess, it's not just working, we work under this westernized framework of how we look after archive materials and collections, but this was a really beautiful way in showing how the, I guess, the Aranda way led the way. And now, I guess the outcome of it is that we've got this long-standing relationship now with the Aranda men. Their cultural heritage from the Strelo tapes have now been digitised for access to their young men who have had a disconnect to their culture. And that, it was a really great experience for our, because we actually established a men's working group to oversee the handling of this whole project, and I just directed them. But again, I was led by those senior men, and which I believe made it so successful. There were so many great outcomes from this, and our staff learnt a lot. And I mean, the privilege that they got to sit with those old men and sit with the collections, because for, us as Aboriginal people, those tapes and those films are not just, I guess, songs and stories. Like, they're our ancestors, they're an extension of our ancestors. So those old men were given that cultural safe space that they could go and sit in those vaults with their old people and talk to them. And it was a really sort of amazing, I guess, change in how the National Film and Sound Archive now manage and look after Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander collections. And that was it was just, it's just really sort of set the benchmark for that, and that how, best practice is in how you bring those knowledge holders on straight away, and I guess lead the project. Like, it was just it was pretty special, and it's really exciting that they now are providing sort of second half of the project was to go out on country to Alice Springs, sit with the Aranda and teach their young men how to, digitize their own material, and also how to access it and provide access to those cultural authorities.
Thank you so much, Tasha. That's really enlightening. I hope it was for everyone else. That was really fantastic to visualize how that worked and understand the framework around it. It's also really important for us all to remember men's and women's sacred business, sacred objects, and cultural law. So thank you for reminding us all about that. That was great. Alicia, did you want to add something from your perspective of a project that has worked coming to you or coming in onto your country?
I guess a project that's probably here in our own community is so we were working with local land services. They got some bushfire recovery money to do some filming on country, and that was the idea they'd come to us with. Community decided that they wanted that to focus really on traditional ecological knowledges and cultural burning, and so from that a project developed where it was a series of workshops which would be filmed. The first one was around bushfoods and medicines. The second one was around actually putting a cultural burn on country, and then the third was around, I guess, the post burn. And I guess the whole thing was around healing country and healing people by reconnecting them to those traditional knowledges. So that's actually what the project was, and the idea was, so it was very much worked out with community, what knowledge would be shared, that, you know, this is sort of what the local land services, the funding body, would expect as an outcome. All the content came back to community. That's what originally the project was. But the exhibition I was curating here, that was in the same area, and it kind of fit perfectly with that. And I was looking for a work that I guess had come from community. So that was a really long discussion with not only the filmmakers who were doing that work, but also with the community in terms of, would that be a possibility? Like, just because it's my country and community didn't mean that I could automatically say, yeah, chuck the video in, because I have my head on a plate. Like, that's not my decision to make. So it was me as a curator going to community and saying, what do you think about this idea? And talking with the artists and saying, what do you think about this, using this film in a different way? And they were all agreeable, but it was to tweak what content would actually be shown in that video installation. So to go from, I guess, a film which was very much, you know, knowledge holders talking about certain foods and plants and stories for that area, through going back and forward, it came down to an installation which was pretty much images and sound. So community asked that the talking, that part of that knowledge, be taken out of it. They wanted to share it, but in a different way, because for the knowledge holders here, it was very much about that knowledge was earned and learnt. And they wanted people to come back to community if they wanted to know more about those plants or about that place. They wanted people to come back to community, not just go and see the video and then that's it. They really wanted it to be something that piqued people's interest and gave them the want, the desire to come and connect with community and really learn from them that way. So I guess that's a project that kind of morphed from something else, but through that discussions back and forth with community. And that was probably over, I guess, the initial discussions about, we've got this funding to do some filming, was probably August last year. And that video work was installed in September, and then there's more filming to go on after that. But yeah, I guess it's probably been over 12 months that kind of took right up until the week before install, to make sure that community was happy and the artists were happy. So yeah, that's probably an example from home.
Yeah, that's a terrific example. It's also really good for us to remember that everyone has different levels of knowledge and different levels of ability to, as you said, you can't just go, yeah, let's put a video up. It doesn't actually work like that. I think that's a really important thing for us to remember. That's a terrific, and in each of those projects, it seems that they're really grounded in community, whether it's about digitizing language or whether it's about a cultural burn. It's very grounded on country. Trish, I just wanted to ask you, when people come to the Australia Council, there must be lots of different questions. Is it, if I wanted to ask lots of questions, can I call the Australia Council? How do I, if I just wanted to speak to someone and I was afraid of kind of getting things wrong and, and wasn't sure what to do, can I just call up and talk to someone? Is that possible?
Yeah, so you can either call the Australia Council and talk to me, or we also have a First Nations arts team as well. So I can put the different emails in the chat box as well. But yeah, feel free anytime to give us a call if you want to talk through, have particular questions or issues. We can also refer you to the relevant people that you should also be talking to in community if you don't know. We often get questions around, I haven't worked with my local Aboriginal community before, who should I talk to? So we can also, provide some of that advice as well in terms of, different organisations, the land councils that you could be talking with in your community, or even arts organisations as well who have been working with your local communities as well. But yeah, always happy to take any queries and provide any advice. I should also mention that in terms of Australia Council funding, if you are collaborating or working with First Nations artists or communities, in our grant applications, you have to tick that you have actually read the protocols, and then you have to also show written evidence that you either have letters of support from elders who you're going to be working with in the sort of relevant community, and also evidence of payment for consultation as well in your budget lines as well. And so the peers who assess all our project funding, they will, if you're applying, they will want to see that evidence in your application as well.
Yeah, thanks, Trish. That's really important that it's true collaboration and payment, which has come up a couple of times, which I think is really important to remember, that if we're asking anybody for advice or collaborating, especially producing something, that it's absolutely on an even keel. We're coming to the end of our session tonight, but I'd love to give you the time just to have a few last words if anyone wanted to jump in and have a few last words. Tasha, Alicia, Trish.
Yeah, I think thank you for inviting me to be part of this amazing panel. It's always great to talk through these complicated, complex issues. I think in terms of protocols, have a read, have a sort of look at the Australia Council protocols, but also think about what country you're based on, and do you have those networks? Have you built up those relationships? Have a think about maybe reaching out to your local Aboriginal Land Council, or if you're in the Torres Strait Islands, the Torres Strait Council as well. Yeah, always happy to take any sort of queries and questions as well. And also, given that the work that's happening at that federal government level as well around the Uluru Statement, earlier today I was at an Uluru Statement forum, and so I would also encourage people, if they're interested, to have a look at some of the work that's happening there around Voice to Parliament and treaty, and also truth telling. There's a lot of work happening around talking about, the actual truth around different massacres. Rachel Perkins's new documentary around the Australian Wars as well, a really good watch in terms of that sort of truth telling. If we want to move forward and really embrace Indigenous ways of knowing and being, an Indigenous culture, I think, as a country, we also need to look at some of the truths that haven't necessarily, come to light as well. Yeah, thank you again for inviting me today.
Thank you, Trish. That's really beautiful and very very important for us to remember the ways of being, knowing, and doing. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Trish said as well. Thank you for inviting me along, and especially being on the panel with these lovely ladies. I definitely I guess my parting words with you all is like, educate yourselves, get informed. There's so much on the internet that you can access in terms of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander resources. I mean, I work at the ABC, so I'm a bit partial to TV and film. So there's also amazing programs like on ABC Indigenous, SBS NITV, and also go to local events like in your community, support your local artists if they're having stalls, and go along, have a yarn with everyone. Just engage. You know, you've got to start somewhere, and I guess yeah, it's just you'd be amazed how engaging and being with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and embracing our culture is really enriching. So thank you. Thanks for coming along and being interested.
Thanks, Tasha. Thank you for enlightening us so much. It's really so important. Alicia, any final words?
Yeah, just following from the ladies. Agree 100% with what they've both said. But I also too think I'll put in a plug for the RADOs. Connect with your regional arts development organisations and your Aboriginal arts development officers, because there are existing networks. If they don't know who to talk to, they'll know who to put you in touch with. So really connecting with those people that are out in the regions and you know, getting their assistance to start forming those relationships and maintain those relationships as well. So yeah, and thank you for having me on the panel.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Yeah, it's all about connecting and relationships, isn't it? That's a really big takeaway from today. Well, thank you all so much. I think we all need to educate ourselves. I think that's a good one, Tasha. Thank you. That there's a whole lot of information out there. To take time to not tick boxes and to really and to listen. Really, thank you. I've listened to so much beautiful and inspiring words from you today, and thank you so much. I found the case studies really quite incredibly inspiring. So thank you for everything. Thank you for, we will wrap up now, but I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you to Regional Arts New South Wales for presenting the panel, to Dr. Tracy Callanan, Arts CEO, and then a big thank you to Tasha James, Patricia Adde, Alicia Lonsdale for their words and insight and lived First Nations experience. Thank you to the audiences today and for thoughtful questions and participation. And I saw everyone putting down where they came from in country. And we look forward to having you back for the final episode of The Country Air in 2022. And we're going to look at a celebration of arts and culture across New South Wales. So thank you all and good night.